It's Thursday, February 23rd, 2017. I'm your host, Sarah Mantle. We have a great show in store for you today. Town Council will consider a proposal to build a $6.5 million carbon filter system at the Mar well field. We're going to find out more about those plans with Town Manager Mark Ells. Then State Representative Randy Hunt receives his committee assignments. We'll talk with him about that. And finally, we'll sit down with Town Councilor Will Crocker on this episode of Barnstable Today. But first, let's go ahead and get a look at today's top headlines. The Growth Management Department wants resident input on how to spend this year's Community Development Block Grant funding. The funds must benefit low and moderate income persons and can be used to create or preserve affordable housing, increase economic opportunities, and improve public facilities. This year's estimated allocation is a little over $270,000. Residents can offer their thoughts during the meeting Wednesday, March 1st at 3 in the Growth Management Conference Room. All, of course, are welcome to attend that meeting. The town's finance department receives competitive bids from bond and note sales underwriters for more than $10 million. Morgan Stanley and Company was the winning bidder for the bonds with an average interest rate of 2.74%. The bond and note proceeds will be used to finance various municipal purposes. Prior to the sale, S&P Global Ratings affirmed the town's AAA bond rating. Well, an important reminder for mariners, mooring permits are due February 28th. You can drop them off at the Marine and Environmental Affairs Office on Finney's Lane before 4:15 on Tuesday, February 28th. Call the Marine and Environmental Affairs Office with any questions. The Massachusetts Department of Transportation continues their roadway improvements for the Route 28 intersection at Burses Way. While there are no detours currently scheduled, traffic during construction operations may be delayed, and motorists are advised to use caution through the construction work area. The work hours will be between 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. And as always, please slow down and use extreme caution when traveling through the road construction areas and, of course, those detour routes, and follow any posted safety and detour signs. Well, up next, we're going to chat with Town Manager Mark Ells. Of course, the town of Barnstable has had to deal with some water issues, as much of the country has after the EPA changed some guidelines and regulations. It's not unique to our community, but definitely something that has been a focus of yours for some time now. One of the ways you and DPW Director Dan Santos have proposed to deal with this is to build about a $6.5 million treatment system, or actually improving the Mar well.
Well, yes. Got to back up a couple of steps in my thought process with this. So we have wells within the now we're talking about the Hyannis water system here.
Okay.
There are 4 water purveyors in town: Cotuit, COMM, Barnstable, and then Hyannis. And so the town manages the Hyannis water system.
Interesting.
The Hyannis water system was privately owned until 2005, I believe. The primary reasons that the town acquired it was to make sure that the Hyannis and the area in and around Hyannis had enough quality and quantity water to address its needs today and in the future. And quite honestly, we've invested a lot of time, effort, and resources into bringing up a greatly deteriorated water system. That's mostly been on the infrastructure standpoint. A lot of it focused on quantity. I mean, certainly our fire department here in Hyannis has benefited greatly, as well as our residents and businesses, by having, hydrants that work, pressures in lines that meet current standards. And have a system in place that has a life to it, that we're looking at 20 years beyond, rather than a system that was at the end of its useful life, quite honestly. One of the more recent challenges that we've had was the drop in the EPA standard for PFAS. Now, PFAS typically comes from fire foams, but it can come from other sources as well. A lot of the focus recently has been on 2 well fields. There's a series of wells at each. The Mary Dunn wells, those are to the north of the airport, and then the Mar well fields, which are really at the intersection of Route 28 and Yarmouth Road, Willow Street, just off to the east of it. And so we went in a year ago and put in place a filtration system on the Mary Dunn wells in response to contamination that we had at that location, and we believe primarily from the Fire Training Academy, where they had used fire foams up gradient.
And did that prove to be really successful?
Yes, no detect.
Great.
No detect. And as soon as we know the technology will address the problem, but the time and the cost is really the challenge we have. And then knowing where the issues will be within the system and within the area that services the system. Because we take our drinking water from our ground. So looking up gradient is a pretty good indicator of where you might have some challenges. So that went into place. That's working exactly how we wanted it to. And this all occurred because the EPA dropped an advisory level on PFAS contamination in the water. They actually dropped it on a Sunday, and without a lot of notice. And they dropped it from 0.2 parts per trillion to 0.07 parts per trillion, which anything in the groundwater, from my perspective personally, and certainly as the town manager, we don't want that. We would like to have water that has no detects in it. That's not the case all the time, and I think we've talked before, as technology allows us to detect things at lower and lower and lower levels. I've used my part per billion, part per million, billion, trillion. We're down to part per trillion. It becomes very trace amounts that may trigger one of these advisories. So the advisory went into place. We dealt with it at Mary Dunn. Now we're dealing with it at the Mar wells.
And so one of the ways I think too that your staff has dealt with the detects at the Mar well is to get some water from Yarmouth.
Yes.
That's a pretty costly scenario.
Yes,
so
it is.
One of the reasons I think that this is being proposed, the $6.5 million, I think it's a carbon filter and then a building to house it so it can
Yes.
be used year round. One of the reasons is to cut down on that continual cost of expensive.
It's about $1.2 million a
Yeah.
year. And it was a cost that 2 years ago we didn't have. And so when we begin to look at putting in place a system with a 20-year life, that you borrow the money and you pay back, the debt service on that borrow is significantly less than what it would cost annually to purchase water from an abutting district. And Yarmouth was great to allow us to connect and have been selling us water at the same rate our end product would cost. But
So not a long-term solution.
it's not
really.
a long-term solution, but it was greatly appreciated that Yarmouth entered into that sort of relationship
And
with
so
us.
this, if passed at Town Council, which of course Town Council had a first reading on this last week, next week they're going to have a second reading. A public hearing will be held as well.
Yes.
They may actually vote on that next week. One of the great things I think about this is that it really does limit that cost, and it really does solve the problem rather than band-aiding it every year with the additional purchase of water.
Well,
from
this
Yarmouth.
in combination with other things, certainly, having no detect in the Mar wells will allow us to increase the usage of Mar. The Mar wells have been minimized at this point. Secondly, our investigation of alternative future well sites. And we can talk more about that in the future, but we're going to need some more wells, both so that we can accommodate growth and so that we can give other sources of clean water that perhaps don't have some of the challenges that wells such as our Mar or our Mary Dunn do. So I think you're going to see us manage this with several approaches, but you don't just turn off a well and then say it's not there anymore. The decommissioning of a public water supply well, I don't know that I've seen it occur, quite honestly. You may gauge how much you use of that particular well, certainly if we have this filtration on there, we'll be able to use it. And the other part of the cost, the 6.5 million, is we have concerns because of where it's located down gradient, of several receptors that could be a challenge for us, that it's going to have the ability to treat more than just PFAS. So,
wonderful.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, if we end up, we could, in theory, not move the structure, but move the filter system if we reduce these wells because we find an alternative location, but want to use the filtration system.
It could be used elsewhere.
We can, yeah. So we're keeping all of our options open. We're trying to minimize the cost. Certainly, we just went through rate hearings. Within those rates, it reflects the costs of what we're doing here. So our ratepayers bear the cost. Our businesses, our residents, all bear the costs of this through the rates that are charged for the water that we provide. And we want to make sure that we keep that affordable. We keep it manageable for our customers as well. So we're always mindful of that.
And want to remind residents, of course, that are watching, they can give feedback on those rate hearings by emailing you, calling you, any which way.
Any and all. And we just had those rates. These would be set, water rates are set on a fiscal year basis, and some other rates are set calendar year. So we've just had those hearings. They're under review at this point. I usually try to take things for at least 30 days under review so I can allow for additional public comment and get an opportunity to use my time before town council during town manager comment to just refresh everybody's memory that we're in a particular process of review, and we'll go from there. So
great. Well, thank you for stopping by, explaining all of this. It can be a little complicated, but we really appreciate your information.
Thank you for having me.
Our guest today, of course, Town Manager Mark Ells. State legislators are receiving committee assignments for this session. To find out more, we chat with State Representative Randy Hunt. Beacon Hill is always a busy place. To find out what's happening, we have joining us now over the phone State Representative Randy Hunt. Randy, I hear you have a few new committee assignments. What can you tell me about those assignments?
Well, I do, and good morning, Sarah. It's good to talk to you, and I hope you're having fun with the show, being the lead person.
Love it. We're having a blast.
Good. Last session I had telecommunications, utilities, and energy, and I still have that committee. But I have two new committees this year that I'm a part of. One is healthcare financing, and the other one is transportation. And one of the biggest budget buster items that we have in the state budget, as well as on people's personal budgets that they have to balance every month, is the cost of health care.
Absolutely.
I'm excited to be on that committee to see what we can do to try and rein in some of the costs on health care without foregoing the good services that we have available to us today.
Yeah, such an important balance, I think, to find there. I actually recently read an article, and I think this is one of our Governor Charlie Baker's priorities as well. He's looking at making a few changes. Have you looked at his proposal at all?
Have I what? I'm sorry?
Oh, I'm sorry. Have you looked at his proposal, Charlie Baker's proposal?
Yeah, as an outside section of the budget, the governor did propose some changes that are designed to roll in or reel in, rather, about a $300 million cost gap that we have at the state level in paying for our Medicaid program, which is called Mass Health. And there are a number of different approaches that are in that outside section to the budget bill. All of that will be looked at in the House budget bill that will be decided on in the last week of April. And probably the one that's gotten the most airing so far is a return to some of the Romney Care concepts that we had, which required businesses that are employing more than 10 people to provide health insurance to their people at a certain rate. In other words, a certain percentage of their employees taking that. And if they don't, then there would be a penalty that's tied to that. That's kind of sticky because you're really going after mostly businesses that are small, although that's not always the case. And you set thresholds for the number of employees, how many hours a week is what's considered a full-time person. All of those elements in there need to make sense and not be punitive on small businesses, which, as you know, generate the most number of jobs percentage-wise that we have in the Commonwealth.
Yeah, and actually, too, I learned a statistic. I wish I could give it to you verbatim, but Wendy Northcross was telling me most business owners on Cape Cod are small business owners. We don't have a lot of big box stores, so we're really looking at a lot of people that might be affected here on Cape Cod. Do you think that there could be, or will you argue or lobby for maybe an inclusion that has an out for, say, seasonal businesses? I know oftentimes this is something when the sick time bill was going around, or the discussion and the debate on that, a lot of times they think they wanted to make maybe a little leeway for seasonal businesses, because so many people have seasonal businesses here as well, and to provide everybody health care, that'd be really challenging for part-time employees.
Oh, it absolutely is, and that's going to be part of the discussion. I don't have the answers to that at this point, but as you know, there are lots of seasonal businesses where employees do certainly work a full week, whether you consider that 30 hours or 35 or 40, but only for part of the year. And that there's a lot of nuance in that we have to look at and take care of. And it's a problem that is certainly a bigger issue down where we are in the tourist economy than it is in other parts of the state.
Right, absolutely. Boston has different issues than maybe Cape Codders. The transportation, another committee that Cape Codders will really appreciate you being on. A lot of talk about the bridge. Why are you most excited to be on that committee?
Well, the bridges are one of them. It turns out that both of the automotive bridges are in my district, so there's a natural piece there. We're also talking about extending the MBTA to come down to Buzzards Bay. We're constantly talking about the MBTA with regard to its equipment and the aging of it and new potential lines that are in the works, as well as other issues in transportation as simple as the amount of money that we're spending to subsidize plans like the ride, and different ways to do those types of things. The whole ride-sharing deal with Uber and Lyft and all of that.
Oh, yeah.
We did some legislation on that last session, and I have a feeling that we're probably going to have to tweak a few things this time. So there's lots of things in the way of transportation that interest me, none more than dealing with the bridge situation and getting a long-term solution in place for that.
Yeah, very important for Cape Cod on many levels, both for residents, tourism, and of course businesses here on Cape Cod. Well, thank you, Randy, for filling us in on all of your committee assignments. I know you'll be great serving on those committees, and I look forward to chatting with you again in a few weeks.
I appreciate it, Sarah. Thanks very much.
All right, great. Talk to you soon, Randy.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. My guest today, of course, State Representative Randy Hunt. To find out what's happening in Precinct 6, we chat with Town Councilor Will Crocker. Well, Councilor Crocker, thank you so much for joining us today. You, of course, are the councilor for Precinct 6 in Centerville. What issues are you focused on for Precinct 6 right now?
Well, one of the issues that we've been working on for some time now, and have been kind of pushing back and forth and going back and forth between the town departments and the council, is commercial vehicle ordinance. Admittedly, it's a touchy subject because sometimes people run their businesses out of their houses, and that's not what we're focused on, because people do that and they have a right to be able to have an office in their house. The problem is sometimes they bring home vehicles that are part of their business that maybe are not necessarily conducive to the area, and that's what we are working with growth management and with the legal department to be able to try and craft an ordinance that is fair to everybody, both the people who don't have a business and who live in that neighborhood versus the people who live in the neighborhood and maybe are running a business out of their house.
Right. I can see both sides, I think, of that issue right off the top of my head. You know, I'm sure many neighbors might find some of these vehicles offensive to look at or feel that it clutters the neighborhood. But on the other side, there are those working folks who, you know, may have a few trucks for their fence company or, you know, construction company or landscaping, who knows, that maybe they don't have a place to store them. So it is a tricky thing to balance. Have you heard some feedback from business owners who might be in that situation?
What we're going to do, and we've recently had a meeting with regard to this, is we're going to put it out to stakeholders, to people who are in those businesses and say, we're trying to do this. We want input from you to be able to say what you like about this, what you don't like about it. Where's the touchy points? Where are the points that the pushback is? Because again, we want to be fair with these people. What we're really trying to deal with here is the people who are on the excessive side of it. We're not trying to put anybody out of business. We're not trying to make people we're not trying to cause problems with their business. For the people who are just trying to work out their, run their jobs. But there are some people who are a little on the excessive side, and that's what we're trying to craft here. Because again, it's trying to strike that balance. But we are reaching out to stakeholders, people who are in the businesses, the construction trades, the landscaping trades, to be able to say what this is what we're thinking about. What do you think?
Yeah, and so important, I think, to get that public feedback. Of course, I'm sure those meetings haven't yet been scheduled, so you'll let us know when, when those are scheduled. We'll spread the word about that. What else are you working on at the council? Maybe not even just Precinct 6, but what else is your focus right now as a councilor?
Well, there's the budget review starts. It's a continuous thing. We're starting that process now. The town manager would now, the new assistant town manager, be working on gathering the information that we need to be able to, from the department heads, to be able to put together the budget.
Yeah, very extensive process. There are also public hearings for the budget process. People are able to speak at town council, which is very important. Do you see anything that you would really like to see included in the budget?
I'm not particularly. I just want to make sure that that we have a budget that's obviously balanced, but make sure that everyone that we can still maintain the quality of life that makes Barnstable the greatest town on the Cape to be able to live in. And it's difficult in these days of fluctuating revenues. We don't know until you get feedback back from the state, from the cherry sheets, what we're going to have for money, and being able to craft a budget that is able to fund the necessary programs that we need to do, and the programs that we want to do. Of course, one of the huge things is a huge question mark is healthcare. From the top down, from Washington down, it all trickles down from Washington to the state, from the state down to the individual towns. Where we are in terms of that process and what we're going to have for money for healthcare.
Yeah, very important, and could be rising costs there. I want to ask you a quick question. At a recent town council meeting, they took a vote, actually the council voted, to put some money that had been designated to acquire a piece of land on Long Beach Road. That was actually, had been allocated for the purpose of getting that land back on Long Beach Road. You guys actually just voted to put that back in community preservation funds. Tell me, how did you vote on that?
I voted originally to put the $500,000 in as the town's stake in whatever we needed to do there. If it had anything to do with land taking, if it had anything to do with legal expenses, I voted again to take it back out. At this point in time, the town manager says, we've lost the cases, we've appealed the cases to land court, we've lost the cases there. Unfortunately, it looks like that situation has rectified itself, and that money can be used now. It's back into the CPC, so we can now use it for CPC uses for historic preservation, for land, or for affordable housing. Great.
Thank you so much for stopping by today, talking a little bit about what's happening on the council. We really appreciate it.
Thank you again for having me.
My guest today, of course, a town councilor for Precinct 6, Will Crocker. Now let's find out what's happening around town in today's community calendar. Well, you can catch some fun improv at the Geyer Barn every Friday night. The New Classics Company put on a great show that requires some really fun interactions from the audience. The show begins every Friday night at 7:30 at the Geyer Barn. The event is free to attend. Donations are accepted. Sturgis Library is celebrating its 150th anniversary with an open house and a birthday party. The library will provide wine, soft drinks, appetizers, and birthday cake. Staff will also be debuting the Sturgis Community Family Tree and will have exhibits of documents and photographs related to the history of the library. The event will be held Sunday, February 25th from 4 to 6. The event is free, and I'm sorry, that's actually Saturday, February 25th. From 4 to 6. The event is free and open to the public. There are no board, committee, and commission meetings for the rest of the week. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to be back tomorrow with another great show for you. Tomorrow we will chat with Patty Machado, Director of Leisure Services. She's going to tell us a lot about recreation activities that we can expect this spring. We're going to talk to Debbie Lavoie. She is the Administrative Assistant for the town's Marine and Environmental Affairs Department. And we'll get an in-depth look at that improv with the New Classics Company for our Arts and Culture segment. For Barnstable Today, I'm Sarah Mannel.